So, we're going to try something a little bit different. Now, as much as I like getting involved in the comment sections with you guys, it's kind of exciting and challenging to me. It's also a little bit stressful, and I was kind of getting some unpleasant psychosomatic effects, I think, as a result of that. Also, there was kind of an issue with redundancy where I would be explaining the same thing to multiple people multiple times, and that's also kind of, yeah. Anyways, we're going to try it this way. Friday mornings, I'll try to read some of your comments and then make a video like this, responding to them. And I'll hopefully be able to tag you guys so that you get a notification or something. Anyways, first off, there was an episode last week involving gratuitous suffering. And maybe I should have looked into it. Maybe I didn't really understand the argument as well. I should have. The argument I had come up with was removing gratuitous suffering, or rather just suffering, as the end point of any given course of action, as the effect of any given cause, would inherently involve fiddling with the idea of a meritocracy of action, the idea that most of the time good actions lead to good effects and bad actions lead to bad effects, right? The metrics by which we would make decisions as sentient creatures would kind of be thrown out of whack. I actually had a conversation with Graphili, I think that's the way to say it, on this subject. We had an interesting conversation, but we didn't really come to any given agreement. We kind of just agreed to disagree, and I don't know if we will now. But it feels like the argument he was making was something to the effect of, oh goodness, come on, why not just remove the whole thing, right? The whole swath, causes and effects involving gratuitous suffering. So, I guess in my mind this presents perhaps an issue, and we maybe talked about this a little bit. Again, still didn't agree, but the question being, is gratuitous suffering, as described in this argument, ever the cause of a choice made by a living creature, right? And it feels like it would be nigh on impossible to delineate gratuitous suffering that comes, I would tend to think it is sometimes the result of a choice made by a human, and therefore it would be impossible to delineate gratuitous suffering that comes as a cause of just events that occur in the world, not intentional choice, and the gratuitous suffering that comes as a result of choice. This is kind of a different argument in my mind and a little bit of a different issue. It feels like under these circumstances, the only way to get rid of gratuitous suffering would be to fiddle with the way creatures make their decisions, right? Their mind, their free will, whatever the case might be there. And that would, I actually made a video on this once. I think it's on my Rumble channel. It's not on my YouTube, I don't think. And I'm not going to go into it again, but it was centered around the idea of a quote from Mahatma Gandhi. If freedom doesn't include the freedom to make mistakes, then it's not really freedom. I'll paraphrase this. If freedom doesn't include the freedom to deviate from the optimal course, including but not limited to taking an evil action willfully or taking an action that will lead to gratuitous suffering, then it's not really freedom. You can do with that what you want. Anyways, Tao the right things. We had kind of had a conversation on the idea of, it was on the Challenge for Atheists one, or Challenge for Atheists / Thought Experiment episode. And he was making the argument that I think aggression is wrong because contradictory action, something like that. Anyways, I think, oh goodness, I'm forgetting how this went. I agreed kind of with the last thing he said in that I think I'd replied then after he said aggression is contradictory, etc., and I'd replied with some sort of thing like, well, you're contradicting me. Isn't that kind of along the same lines? He had said something to the effect that argument is not aggression, therefore, yeah. I didn't necessarily disagree with the last statement he said, but I guess I would also tend to think that physical aggression is also a form of negotiation. It's just, not moral. It's not moral negotiation. It's not logical negotiation. It's not even an appeal to emotions or something like that, right? And it's kind of a sucky means of negotiation in that you don't have to be morally right. You don't have to be logically right? You don't have to appeal to anyone's emotions. You just beat the crap out of the person and take what you want. For the record, I actually think there theoretically would have been a time when this might have been like slightly more optimal than it is today. Right? It's not optimal for dealing with human beings, but there would have been a time where literally you were fighting against nature, and you can't negotiate with nature. You beat the crap out of it and take what you want. That's the whole concept. So there might have been a time when, to a greater extent, might literally made right. Anyways, next one. Greg Fraser. He was saying something to the effect, he was trying to explain, again, I think it's on the same episode of Challenge to Atheists. I had a conversation with him last week, I think, in the comments, and I think I had said something about this in one of the videos, that he was more explaining how morality comes about, but not why, and I had explained why that might not be a great thing. There are deviants in society who don't agree that morality is a necessary, or intrinsic human value is necessary, all these things. Therefore, I don't think it's enough to explain how something comes about unless you're expecting evolution to fix these people for you, right? You kind of have to be able to argue people into believing that morality is a good thing, that intrinsic value exists, etc., etc. All right, next up. Sir Guy, I don't know if there was another thing at the end of his name, Iron Man mask. Iron Man is a really cool superhero, by the way. Something to the effect, I think he was saying something snarky, I think, about God creating evil. I don't think God created evil, per se. I would put it this way. If a person has a child who then turns out to be Hitler, in spite of all this person's best attempts to steer them in the right direction, does anyone blame the parent, per se, for that? I don't think I would. Like, if they did their best, like, you can do your best with a child, but they're still going to make their own choices. In my mind, God created creatures that were capable of choosing between right and wrong. That's his only sin, if indeed it can be called that. Yes, he created the potential for a being to choose right and wrong, but he didn't force them to do either one. So I would tend to think God didn't really create evil. All right. Oh, goodness. Oh, I'm trying to read this. I don't know if I can read that one. All right, come on. So one of the episodes I'd actually done this week was, oh goodness, kind of optimal outcomes and why we disagree about them. Now, further, Grafili had actually made a comment on there that we can't really even agree on what is an optimal outcome sometimes. And for the record, this was kind of a generalization. I agree that priorities get involved. It's not by any means as simple as, oh, we just can't agree on an optimal outcome. Sometimes we can't even agree on the right priorities, like what is valuable, what is not valuable. But I would tend to think, as a generalization, it kind of works. Right? We as a society, we can agree kind of on like what is a good thing to strive for, what is a bad thing to strive for, and yeah. Again, generalization, not meant to be like perhaps as holistic. It might not be as holistic as it should have been. All right. Oh, triangle understander or something was made a comment on a video I'd said about spotting psychos. That was kind of an interesting one as well. Again, kind of a generalization. I was maybe, rather than the specifics of getting into what constitutes a psychopath or a sociopath, which I agree, it's very, very different. It's hard to figure out like what constitutes a psychopath, what constitutes a sociopath, or just someone with autism, someone who's dysfunctional in some way. In the video, I think I was more referring to people who attempt to hide their true selves. That may be the general idea. I think that's about it, actually. For the record, Triangle Understander may or may not have said I was autistic. I'm not for sure, though. It's hard to read stuff in comments. But for the record, I've never been diagnosed with anything, but I've also never been tested. I figure, why give yourself an excuse to not try? Why give yourself an excuse to be mediocre? Ambition's kind of a finite thing. And I think I would push myself a lot less if I were given a reason not to. If I were given an excuse to not be better than I am right now. Anyways, thanks for watching. Please like, subscribe, and leave a comment if you like. Have a happy weekend.